Joe Burrow, Jessie Bates, and Chidobe Awuzie made an appearance at UFC, and Joe Burrow looked pretty cool doing it. Plus, who do you dislike more, Joe Montana or Aaron Donald?
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien, back after a little holiday weekend, and Joe Burrow, Jessie Bates, and Chidobe Awuzie had a pretty fun holiday weekend. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. We appreciate all of you who subscribe and follow and who make us your first listen. James, we're going to start in Vegas at UFC. Routine topic for a football podcast, of course. Ultimate Fighting Championship had some prominent Bengals in attendance in Joe Burrow, Jessie Bates, and Chidobe Awuzie. Most notably, getting the most attention was Joe Burrow, who was pictured with his teammates sitting on the cage and with many fighters who he thanked on Instagram for not beating him up for those photo ops.
Yeah, it's I think it's cool, for Bengals fans to see, Joe Burrow, the face of the franchise, the face of the organization, get to go to UFC events because he's such a huge UFC fan and he's doing this stuff. I mean, this is UFC 276. It's the biggest event from a fighting standpoint of the summer. And he's there and he brings with him Jessie Bates and Chidobe Awuzie. And that's the part that we'll get to in a bit, right? Is how does that impact things that we knew about the trip to Vegas? We didn't know exactly when. And, we found out when, I would say, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that he was going to be at UFC 276. So not shocked at all that they planned it around the 4th of July weekend. But yeah, typical Joe Burrow. You got the edgy outfit. I mean, when he was on top of the cage, he had the teddy bear on his T-shirt and then the bucket hat at night with the sunglasses, wearing all black. I mean, that's what that dude was doing. But the thing that I think was interesting is really outside of Chad Johnson, and even him, I think it's to a lesser extent. Like Joe Burrow is going to continue to start to be at events that he's interested in or wants to go to, right? Because he has that gravitas, that power. But he's going to take pictures with people that want pictures with him too. And that's what I think we're going to start to see, where the Bengals quarterback is this star that people know about and root for. There was that Seal quote. I forget who. I think it was Kay Adams.
Yeah, Adams
took a picture with Seal, and it's like, oh, we were both rooting for Joey B. Like, that's the type of thing. Right. And so this UFC 276 weekend, to me, it's just a reminder, it's different now than it's been. Carson Palmer never got that, right? Even though he was extremely talented. Andy Dalton never got that. Chad Johnson did, but it was a different era, different time, and he didn't play quarterback. It's a much different time in an unprecedented territory, I think, with Joe Burrow leading this Bengals team into 2022.
Yeah, I think what's different about it doesn't necessarily, well, it does actually translate to the football field, just to bring it back to that a little bit. He has this unassuming confidence that we've talked about before, the internal or innate or inherent swagger. And it's not like he's seeking the spotlight. He's not that kind of guy. And we've talked about that before too. And he's talked about it before, where he's not necessarily trying to be in these situations. He's not Nike commercials. He doesn't have 7,000 State Farm or whatever Baker Mayfield has commercials. He's doing what he wants to do and happens to be this magnetic superstar. And the Bengals haven't had that, to your point, not at this level. I would say probably ever. Not at this level. Chad certainly was very popular, but I think there are some differences, like you say, and that does translate back to football in terms of the leadership that we always hear about from his teammates and from his coaches that he constantly exhibits. And it just is very consistent with the person that we've known or come to know as the Bengals starting quarterback. And yeah, there's definitely a cool factor. And I think it translates to the locker room and the football field too.
And the fact that he wasn't with Jamar, right? Wasn't with T. Yeah, he wasn't with Joe Mixon, these popular offensive players, which he wasn't with the new offensive lineman. He's with Jesse Bates, right? Safety. And then he's with the top cornerback on the team in Awuzie. And I think that I forget who he mentioned this to, but wanting to pop around the locker room and be friends with everybody and get to know everybody on the team. Well, that's an example of that. Because even though him and Jesse Bates are, in the same age, a lot of guys on the team are in that 25-year-old range. And so they don't necessarily have to be friends. Awuzie has only been on the team for 1 year. Didn't necessarily have to, be tight with him or tight enough to go to Vegas, which, by the way, fellas, you want to be pretty choosy and picky about who you go to Vegas with. Take it from me. You don't want to just go with a bunch of, 30 guys. That doesn't necessarily work. And so, yeah, the fact that it was those guys, I thought was interesting as well.
Cheeto, his chess partner, of course, the chess board bonding, taking them to UFC together. And he said that he's close with Jesse Bates. I mean, these are two leaders on the team, two captains in those two guys. So it does make sense that those two guys are good friends.
Yeah. And you say partner. I think it's more Cheeto kicks Joe's ass.
Rival? Aspirational rival?
There you go.
Yeah. The guy that he wants to be one day on the chessboard. Maybe it's payment. Maybe they had a bet, and he's like, if I win this one, or if you win, or you can I'll pay for your UFC ticket, or you pay. I don't know. Maybe none of them paid. They're probably at that
I don't
level,
know.
right?
I don't know if they. I imagine they had to pay something. But yeah, I mean that's free advertising for UFC as well. So.
Well, UFC was marketing them, right? Like on all of the UFC socials, it was pictures of Joe Burrow and some pictures of Cheeto and Jessie as well. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And so that part matters. But you mentioned paid, and it's a good segue.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking here. Tick, tick, tick. The clock is ticking to that July 15th deadline. Will Jesse Bates get paid? Will their little meet up in Vegas, trip to Vegas, have any impact on that? We'll talk about it. But first, a word from Built Bar, the #1 protein bar on the planet. And Jake, good news, because you love the coconut brownie chunk. Well, now there's a coconut brownie chunk puff, and it is amazing. You don't need to, just take my word for it. You can go to built.com right now and check out all of the different Built Bars that they have. But if you want a low calorie, high protein, low sugar option where you're going to get the protein you're looking for, it's going to taste great, you're not sacrificing taste, then coconut brownie chunk puffs are perfect for you. And whether it's the coconut brownie chunk part that you love, the covered in 100% chocolate, or the marshmallow that's inside, it's amazing. So check them out right now at built.com. Use promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off of any of the puffs, any of the bars right now. Promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com.
I could use some Built Bars today, James. As soon as we're done with this, I'm moving.
Yeah, you are.
Next episode, I'm going to have a different background. It won't be
Is
finished.
Jake moving to Cincinnati? ... Question mark. ... Question mark.
Don't cliffhang him like that, James.
Yeah, the answer's no.
The answer is no. Oh, the poor people.
People got so excited right there for a second. Nope, he's staying in Canada.
So, Jesse Bates, will he be staying in Cincinnati for this year? Yeah, I think that at this point, everyone that covers the team, myself included, agree that Jesse Bates will show up at some point in training camp and will be around for week 1 of the regular season. I wouldn't be surprised if do you think he's there day 1 of training camp? You think he's there on time for training camp?
Call me like the optimistic one, but yes, I do. And I, the reason I do is because everything's done then. Like the tag has been applied. The deadline is there. You know the verdict. You know you're making 12.9 million. And what's best for you as a player? Well, what's best for you as a player is to be 100% healthy and ready to go to have the best season of your life. Well, what's the benefit of skipping training camp? A Zach Taylor training camp isn't going to be this, crazy hard, insane, you just can't do it. And it's not just Zach, it's NFL training camp these days. And so it's like, yeah, man, I mean, why wouldn't you show up and handle business? So I do think he's going to show up and be there on time. And that might be the impact of a meeting like this, the bonds he feels with his teammates. When it's one thing to skip voluntary stuff for the part of the negotiating business side, right? Because there's still a chance, and as we record, there's still a chance over a week before that July 15th deadline for him to get something done. So there's posturing and there's negotiating, or there's leveraging, I guess is the word I should say. Well, there's no more leverage after July 15th. And training camp doesn't start until the 27th. Expect you here. Why wouldn't you be here? What's the best case? The best case is you go out there, you make 12.9 million, and you have the best a career year. And some team like the Jets offers you $20+ million a year next year if the Bengals don't tag you again. Okay, well, you got to earn that. How do you earn that? By having the best year of your career. Where does that start? To me, training camp. It doesn't start with skipping half of camp or most of camp or not practicing at all and then showing up week one. Like that to me is kind of scary for Jessie. If you do that, are you really going to have the year you need to have? So that's kind of where I land. And I agree with you. I don't think a deal gets done. I don't think either side is blinking. And it was also interesting. I don't know if you saw this over the weekend. The Bengals tweeted out pictures of their defensive backs.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 23, baby. Dax Hill was in there.
Right.
And it's like, oh, this is awkward. Because obviously Jessie Bates would be the one, but he wasn't there to take pictures.
He wasn't there?
Yeah.
They didn't have him for media day. I was thinking about that when I saw those pictures. Like, maybe the most awkward thing is that they don't have promotional photos of Jessie Bates for this. I mean, I'm sure they can get them. But
well, from last year, but yeah, I mean, this year was different, and yeah.
But I think the best point there is that there's no more opportunity for business after July 15th. So what indeed is the point of not showing up for training camp? Like, you do that if you actually intend to not play. And
Yeah.
you think of the history of the players that have not played, and it's Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah.
Is Jessie Bates going to be Le'Veon Bell? I know I expressed some interest, some possibility around this when we first talked about it, but that just, yeah, they're very different guys. And I do think he's shooting himself in the foot a little bit if he goes that route. And I think he knows that. And I think he's leaving a lot of money on the table, obviously. And it just doesn't seem like it's a very rational choice for anyone involved. So I do wonder if it made any impact on the negotiations. I doubt it. I mean, it's not like Burrow's out there. I mean, Burrow has been in Jesse's corner publicly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hope he gets what he wants, what he deserves. So does it have an impact in the long term? In terms of the negotiation, in terms of whether Jessie Bates shows up or not? Probably not, right? Probably not a huge impact. But it is nice to see them bonding at the very least, There's some team building there, but what do you think?
It's an awkward spot, right? It's imagine your employer values, like you value, hell, let's just use Locked On, right? Let's just say Locked On and me get into this contract stalemate, totally made up right now, contract stalemate where I want X amount, they're not willing to give it to me. And you're like, oh, well, yeah, I like working with James, but I understand where they're coming from. it might not even get brought up. We might not even have that discussion. And so when you're Burrow, what do you say? Because you can't control it. You can't really help him. And so that's the part of it where it's like, I don't know. Now, could Bates be like, man, good luck negotiating with these fools next year? Like, could he say that to Joe? Maybe. The difference is the Bengals are going to value Burrow at a much different level than Jessie Bates, right? And that part of it is obvious. So, yeah, I think maybe it gets brought up a little bit, maybe jokingly more than anything, but there's nothing Burrow can truly do to get Bates' deal done. And from the Bengals side, and from Bates' side, I think the only path would be, hey, Jessie, do you really want to play for the Texans next year? Do you really want to go to the Titans, who I think, and this is just a random take, are going to flop in 2022 and be much worse? And then they're going to be desperate. And then, they pay Jessie Bates to try to shore up their defense, even though they have a bad quarterback and gave away their best weapon. You know my point. So look at me just hammering the Titans. So that's the part of it where, like, maybe there's a little bit there where it's like, come on, Jessie, like, let's be my but I don't think he would do that because he wants Jessie to what? Get paid.
I think that's a James Rapien argument more than it's a Joe Burrow argument. I think I agree with your first take that it's like it probably doesn't come up or doesn't come up much. I don't think this was an opportunity for Joe Burrow to go out there and be like, Jessie, come on, sign your deal. Like, that doesn't seem like something Joe Burrow would do, right? Every time he's asked, like, hey, do you talk about XYZ topic that is burning in fans' mind, like Jamar's drops, or do you talk about this or that with the guy? He's like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't talk about, like, this. To me is a similar topic where he's not going to talk about contract negotiations unless Jessie brings it up. It just, I don't know. We don't know what these guys are talking about behind closed doors. Doesn't seem like something Joe Burrow would necessarily do.
No,
Might be like a suggested thing. Like, we're doing this thing, we're building our camaraderie, instead of an explicit conversation.
Yeah. No, and that's the part that we don't know. But I doubt it too. I don't think it gets brought up. I think it will. There's going to be a point in Burrow's career, and I'm not talking about with Bates, but there's going to be a point in Burrow's career where it gets brought up, and he, much like Brady with the Bucs, is like, hey, come on, come back. Or let's get your deal done so we can keep playing. Or, hey, Justin Jefferson, come join me, T, and Jamar. Like, who knows, right? We could be talking 8 years from now. But I think that there will be a point where he does do more of that. I just don't think we're there yet. That's all. I don't.
Yeah. Well, where we are is debating at this point in the offseason which player Bengals fans dislike more. Aaron Donald, Joe Montana, other? I think other is the answer for many modern Bengals fans. We'll go there coming up next. Aaron Donald ended the Bengals' most recent efforts to win a Super Bowl. Joe Montana, well, he did it a couple times back in the day for many of our listeners. And I wonder how these guys would compare to some of the most disliked Pittsburgh Steelers in recent history. I'm thinking like Hines Ward is a guy Bengals fans really don't like. Ben Roethlisberger, a guy Bengals fans really don't like. I'm sure there are others, and I'm sure our fans will, or not our fans, Bengals fans listening will let us know who we're forgetting. But in terms of Super Bowl villains, I think this is just a generational question. James, would I be curious to hear from the guys and fans, the people that watched the 80s Super Bowls and this Super Bowl? That's who I'm really curious to hear from. Time heals all wounds, but I know that there are Bengals fans that still just, the 49ers are worse for them than the Steelers because of those Super Bowls. I wonder how Aaron Donald fits into that conversation for those folks. Because for the people that are, 38, 40 and younger, it's probably Aaron Donald, because the memory of those early Super Bowls is not as strong or as pertinent in their mind. But I do wonder. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, to me, I get the Aaron Donald part. I think that the aspect of that, as much as it's Aaron Donald and he was completely disruptive, right? You had the 2 sacks. You had the quarterback hit at the end. That was essentially a sack that ended the game. But I don't know if there's Aaron Donald hate there. It was like, oh, he's great. And the Bengals weren't prepared to block him, and they didn't have the talent to do so. And that's it. With the other two, Super Bowl 16, Super Bowl 23, man, freaking Joe Montana, right? And I think when you talk to people that recall, even the second one, even Super Bowl 23, he throws for 300 plus yards, multiple touchdowns, drives them down late in the game. Those are the heartbreakers, heart wrenchers, the ones that you're like, man, if they could have just made one more play. So no, I think that it's Joe Montana when it comes to the Super Bowls. And to be specific, he had 357 yards and 2 touchdowns in Super Bowl 23. Like, those numbers are insane. In that time, in that era too, which certainly matters. So I think Joe Montana is the biggest heel when it comes to Bengals Super Bowl memories. Now, if the Bengals play the Rams again this year and Aaron Donald's unblockable and we're talking about a slugfest again, McVay versus Zach Taylor, which, by the way, sign me up for that. That'd be fun. A rematch. That'd be pretty cool. Jalen Ramsey versus Jamar Chase and T. Higgins 2.0. Like, think about that. It would be cool. Who knows? Maybe Odell returns and is on the Rams or Bengals.
Or Bengals.
Anyways, yeah. Did you like how I snuck that in there? You like how I snuck that in there? But yeah, I think it's Montana. But you're right when you're talking about overall hated sports figures, like for Bengals fans. Oh, there's sort of multiple Steelers. I think Ray Lewis would be on that list. Troy Polamalu, I think people disliked him very much. Now, he was just really damn good, but I think he was on that list. But probably Big Ben, it would be number one. People just,
yeah.
I mean, think about all the times he would twist out of a potential sack and throw it to seemingly no one. Hines Ward would be another one as well.
Hines Ward, for me, is way up on the list, man. The guy is just so dirty. And in the Hall of Fame. Is he in the Hall of Fame? He is in the Hall of Fame, right? Am I crazy? People talk about him like he's a Hall of Fame receiver and talk about him like he's this great all-time receiver. And he to me, Hall of Very Good.
Yeah, no, he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer, and he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Okay, good.
Steelers fans will say he should, but I mean, and he had 12,000 yards, but it's because he played for 15 seasons or whatever it was.
Yeah, I mean, he was a really good blocker. He was on run-heavy teams, and he was a productive receiver. I'm not saying he was a bad player or anything. Like, and the objectivists out there will probably agree that he was good, but man, was he dirty and easy to hate as a Bengals fan. Jerome Bettis, going back a little bit more, that guy was frustrating to watch for Bengals fans. Kimo von Oelhoffen, I think, will hold an infamous place in Bengals fans' hearts in a bad way for everyone that remembers 2005. But I think that, yeah, if you ask anybody that was alive in the 80s, it's got to be Joe Montana. Mm-hmm. Maybe some people even Jerry Rice. Like, Joe Montana was so lucky in those games in a big aspect too. Lewis Billups dropped interception in the first one. He only threw for 157 yards. Ken Anderson threw for 300 yards in that game. Threw 2 picks, but threw for 300 yards in that game. The Bengals lost.
They had a bunch of penalties in that first Super Bowl. Second Super Bowl, Boomer didn't play well.
Right. They had 4 turnovers in the first Super Bowl. Both teams had 8 penalties in that game. But 4 turnovers, that'll get you. That'll get you.
Yeah, it will. It will. Here, the good news is they were this close and no one expected him to get that close, and they should be able to block Aaron Donald a little bit better if they face him this time around. Hopefully it's not in another 7 years like it was in 81 and 88.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of trajectory they take, right? Are they the Rams? No, because the Rams needed to find a new quarterback. And I know that there are some loud anti-Joe Burrow analytic factions out there. It's weird that it comes from the analytic people, the anti-Joe Burrow stuff. More so than the baby arm Burrow crowd at this point, it comes from the
It's all
analytic
trash.
community at this point.
It's all
There are
trash.
people that wonder, like, oh, how sure are we that he's not Jared Goff?
Come
Like,
on. Come on.
well,
Is that a thing? Is that a thing? Because
it is a thing. Because Jared Goff went to the Super Bowl early in his
Bro.
career. I know.
Okay.
I know. I'm just telling you where they're
how
coming
sure
from.
are we?
I'm pretty sure. But
put it like this. The Lions would trade their entire roster, including Jared Goff and their 2023, all of their picks right now for Joe Burrow. The entire thing.
But Jared Goff did get an extension.
Amon-Ra St. Brown. They'd trade them all. They would trade them all. Everybody.
Anyway, point is,
Williams.
probably not the Rams path because they had to find a new quarterback. Maybe it could be like the Rams path back in some other ways, or is it more like, Kansas City? I would say the way the AFC looks, it's hard. That makes you think it might be more like the Rams, where they have to get back to that point because of how random and how much variance there is in the postseason, which I think we both expect. If things go according to plan, the Bengals should be back in that picture, and then things go off the rails. Who knows what happens there? But hopefully there's no more players to live in Bengals fan infamy next time around. That's the goal.
Agreed.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I've got to go move to a new house. We'll be back, however, tomorrow with another episode. As training camp gets closer, the Jessie Bates deadline, as James said earlier, just over a week away. And we continue our march through the summer off-season months. Until next time, Bengals fans, thanks for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. You need a little bit more NFL content? Go check out Locked On NFL, sometimes featuring James Rapien and our other great Locked On NFL hosts. Thanks for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.